No, you don't need. You don't need the.
I'm doing this my way. He a legend. 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 He a legend.
Fucking on it though. Then
He
you
a
can't work
legend.
it up later.
Welcome to the league. To the league. To the league. To the league. To the league of items. Welcome to the league. To the league. To the league. To the league. To the league of items.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and today we are going to discuss just how good the evil geniuses are, and we're going to do that by looking around the world. But before we do that, I want to discuss the potential of teams implied by the ages of the players on the teams. And this isn't my ageist take that once you hit a certain age you cannot win the world championship. I just think that it's unlikely you will win a world championship. And the reason why that came about is because Jat posted something the other day that said Zoomers or Boomers or both thought it was interesting to look at the age composition of the projected starting rosters in the LCS. He got it from Leaguepedia, and then he made this graphic and the charts for it. So when you look across the league, there are some relatively young teams now where you have EG, C9, and TSM that have younger rosters, and a lot of that has to do with the potential of a team, because if you look back at the World Championships, the players who win the World Championships generally have an average age like a couple of years under 23, and the oldest players who win World Championships so far have been 23, 24 years old. So you might ask yourself, why? In my opinion, the reason I think that we see that happen pretty often is because every couple of years you get a player who is a true difference maker, a true elite player. These players don't exist in a vacuum where they're can be judged on their own merits. Like out of 100, a player like Faker or Showmaker, Viper, Ruler, these guys are 100 out of 100. They are the players who can make your team win a world championship. Almost not on their own, obviously that's a ridiculous statement, but you need a player of that caliber to win a world championship. My argument would be that unless this player has shown they have that upside, by the time they're 22, 23, 24, they're never going to show it. And the reason why I believe that is because, in my mind, talent is somewhat obvious. And there are players who are out there who are talented who never turn into anything or never win a world championship. And part of that can be because of their the lack of talent surrounding them on their team, or other factors that they don't have any control over, which is somewhat unfortunate. But I think that it's the reality. And this happens in a lot of other sports. You generally don't see a player who has been around for 5, 6, 7 years transform into something else after a certain age. So what I'm looking for when I'm looking at players and their what I think that their potential might be, it's a blend of how old are they, how much have we seen them, how much experience do they have, and it's even more important and significant when you consider there are always new players coming in around the world where these are younger players, and we talk about windows in traditional sports where there's a 2-year window where a team might be able to be competitive because all of their players should be hitting their peaks about the same time. But there are other kinds of windows that are determined by generational talents like Faker. So in international soccer, you have players like Ronaldo and Messi, where for the past almost 20 years, probably I guess 15 or 20 years, they have been two of the best players in the world, and they've been winning every international award, not every single year, but that's their peak talent, and they have the ability to win these international competitions multiple times. That's the kind of player that we're looking for in League of Legends, and you're not going to go from a 20-year-old middle of the table support for Dignitas and turn into an elite international superstar. It's just in my mind, it's not going to happen. Is it possible? Sure. Will it happen at some point? I would be shocked if it did. And the reverse has kind of happened. But whatever, we don't have to talk about that anymore. But the thing that stuck out here is that for EG, C9, and TSM, I do think that it's possible that I have a bias towards those younger players because we don't see as much experience, or we don't have as much tape on all of them. But and it also kind of works the opposite way, where I kind of have a lower opinion of some of these teams like Team Liquid and 100 Thieves, because if players from that age group are going to win a world championship, why wouldn't it be the 23-year-olds who have already won world championships? Or why wouldn't it be the 23-year-olds from China? Why wouldn't it be the 23-year-olds from Korea? And we have some insanely talented players around the world. And I just don't think a lot of those exist in North America right now, in that like 22, 23, 24 year bracket. So that's kind of how I wanted to start this video. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at where I think Evil Geniuses, who are my favorite team right now, because I love their upside, I think theoretically they have a chance to be competitive in an international environment this year if everything breaks right, but also next year, the year after. I do think that they can truly be special in that way. So what we should do first is talk about my opinions on the LCS. So this list, which is very similar, like, this is the funny thing. I posted this video, I think, I posted my video on the LCS tier list about 10 days ago, maybe 11 days ago. I think it was right after lock-in was finished. I posted it before people like Jat, Azael, the Dive podcast. I posted mine before they posted theirs. Mine is identical to the one that they put on the Dive, the aggregate one. It's identical except for Evil Geniuses and Team Liquid. And I think that I respect what they do, and I think that some of them are better than others. Like, I think Azael is much more knowledgeable than the other people on the Dive, and I think he's more realistic, he's more grounded, and he just has a better perspective for these kinds of things, at least how it applies to betting, which might be just like we're looking for similar things and the other guys are looking for different stuff. But I think that the age of teams like Team Liquid and 100 Thieves, it's not about the age itself. It's about what it implies. Your age when you're a League of Legends player implies that you have experience, both good and bad. So a lot of these players, we've seen their best and we've seen their worst. We've probably seen their best and we've probably seen their worst, is what I should say. So let me get the rosters just so I don't mess anything up. But we're gonna take a look at Evil Geniuses compared to the teams that I think are worth talking about. So I'm only going to compare Evil Geniuses to 100 Thieves and to Team Liquid. And their matchup one-on-one against one another might not be favorable for Evil Geniuses right now. But as time goes on, as a player like Jojo Pion gets experience, as the team realizes what their playstyle should be like, what it should look like, they're just going to get better and better, in my opinion. I think that there are other advantages for teams like Team Liquid and 100 Thieves. So like let's start with Team Liquid. For Team Liquid, Bwipo, Santorin, Bjergsen, Hansama, Core JJ. So let's ask the question, which players out of this do I think are good enough to win a world championship? Obviously, Core JJ is good enough to win a world championship. Obviously, Hansama has gotten to semifinals, I think, before with Misfits. Bwipo was in the finals against Invictus Gaming and got completely slapped by Invictus Gaming in the Shy. But I do think that Bwipo can make it deep into a knockout round. I think that Bjergsen could make it into a knockout round and go pretty far, but I think that Bjergsen and Santorin specifically are the biggest limiting factor for this Team Liquid lineup, because there will be a point at Worlds where Santorin and Bjergsen need to be elite, and they need to go head to head with Tarzan Duenby or Canyon and Showmaker, and that will be a big enough difference for them to lose a series. I just think that, I genuinely think that's the case. Santorin has a lot of limitations as a jungler. He's obviously a very good jungler in the LCS. Well, not really. He's like a middle-of-the-pack jungler in the LCS. A jungle is so important at these international competitions. I just don't see them going as far because a limited champion pool, and I don't believe in Team Liquid. And at the end of the day, this is my opinion on things. I know that you can have a different opinion. Sometimes I sound a little authoritative, but that's just how I talk. And then with Bjergsen, like I do like how Bjergsen kind of plays the game. He can kind of neutralize the lane a little bit and play something that's more passive in lane. But again, at some point, that play style and those champions will put an unnecessary amount of pressure on the team to execute at an extremely high level, which decreases their likelihood of beating a team that is more talented than them. Personally, I value talent more than experience or intelligence. Well, I guess not really intelligence. I value talent, perceived talent, more than actual experience. That's why I was pushed towards Evil Geniuses to win lock-in, which allowed a lot of people to make a good chunk of money on lock-in. So let's talk about what their matchup would look like head-to-head. So Impact against Bwipo. Do you think that Bwipo and Impact can go head-to-head and go even? I think that the finals kind of proved that Impact can deal with Bwipo. Azael made the point that Impact beat Bwipo 2 out of 3 lanes. I don't think that in itself is like a good enough measure to gauge the two. Like, I would rather have Bwipo on my team than Impact. But I think that Impact is good enough, and Impact is a world champion. He has won a world championship. He is 26 now. He's the oldest player out of both of these teams, which, like, a position, if I was going to have an older player on my team, I'd rather have them be a top laner or a support. The same way that in football, for example, you can have an older quarterback. Tom Brady has proven that. But you can't have an old running back. It's unlikely to help your team enough to justify that from an athleticism perspective. So let's just keep going. Santorin against Inspired. I think Inspired is a significantly better player than Santorin. They have similar styles, but I think that Inspired is just a better version of Santorin. I think that the best version of Inspired is better than the best version of Santorin now, and better than any version of Santorin that we've seen. Jojo Pion against Bjergsen. This is where the big question mark is. Like, Jojo Pion is obviously a very talented player, and he's very young. He has a diverse champion pool. He showed, I think, 7 or 8 different champions during lock-in. So as time goes on, Evil Geniuses will probably develop a playstyle that allows Jojo Pion to stay in one group of champions. Like, you can always change it between matches, but going into a match, he'll have an identity. He'll have an archetype that we can kind of attribute what their draft is going to, or not attribute what their draft is going to look like. We can attribute to Jojo Pion, which will allow us to understand what their drafts may look like going into a matchup. Like, I do think that Team Liquid against Evil Geniuses, like in the late spring, in the summer, theoretically at Worlds, I think that Inspired and Jojo Pion will be better than Santorin and Bjergsen, will have a big enough talent discrepancy that is going to exacerbate the draft and will allow Evil Geniuses to gain an advantage in jungle mid specifically, which is very important in most metas. And then in the bot lane, we have Danny and Vulcan against Hansama and Core JJ. I'm a huge Hansama fan, and I'm a big Core JJ fan as well. I think that Danny is better than Hansama. I think that Danny's ceiling is higher than Hansama, but Hansama is the kind of player who could theoretically be played around, and I think Danny has proven that he's already that type of player. The question is, when we see them in an international competition, will they wilt under the pressure of an international competition? I think most likely no. Danny has seemed like a very even keel person, has a good personality, does well in interviews, can communicate how they feel, is a younger player, so you do worry a little bit about their like emotional intelligence. But Danny, from everything that you've seen, there's no reason to question how he's going to handle himself in these high pressure environments. And I think Jojo Pion is a big enough head case in a good way that it's not going to get to him either. I think that amount of pressure might make him somewhat angry sometimes, and I don't know anything about him. This is just like a hypothetical or me projecting onto him potentially. I think that he seems like the kind of guy where if he has that high of an opinion of himself, he will get angry if his team isn't doing well. And I don't know if that's going to be good for a team like Evil Geniuses, but it could be a very good thing. It could be a very bad thing. And then with Vulcan's obviously one of the best players in the league. So the reason why I have Evil Geniuses above Team Liquid and above 100 Thieves is because of how I think. Well, above Team Liquid is because of how I think those matches play out. So now let's do 100 Thieves. I think that Impact is better than Someday. His career has been better than Someday. I think at one point the talent of Someday and Impact were deemed to be very close, if not Someday favored. But Someday was periodically on garbage teams and was never really able to highlight how great they are, which is very sad. I think that Inspired is better than Closer, full stop. I know that Closer has looked good in the LCS, but that's the LCS. Inspired has looked better in a harder league in the LEC, and I think that over time we will see that Inspired is just a better player than Closer. Could there be a meta that Closer is better than Inspired? Sure, but I don't think that it exists. I don't think that we will see it. Then we have Jojo Pion against Abadaga. I think that Abadaga is a good mid laner, not a great mid laner. Could I see him doing okay against the international teams? Yes. He is 22, and we have seen him at times be very good. So I think that specifically in the LCS run, or the LEC run with Schalke, he did look like he could carry games. But he was carrying games on champions like Kassadin, which that's your job, is to be a late game carry. Which I'm not trying to take anything away from him. It's just I think that's part of the reason why we have such a high opinion of him. Also, he's played well in the LCS, and he looks like he has great synergy with Closer. He has a flexible champion pool in the same way that Bjergsen has a flexible champion pool, in the same way that Jojo Pion has a flexible champion pool. So the question ultimately becomes, who's a better mechanical player, Jojo Pion or Abadaga? I don't know. I haven't seen enough out of Jojo Pion, but I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that at his peak, within his range of outcomes, I think that Jojo Pion could just be better than Abadaga as well. He could also be worse, and that's something that's going to play out over the year. But if you told me today, like, would you be willing to bet on Evil Geniuses to win the Spring Split? I would say yes. Would I be willing to bet on them to win the Summer Split? I would say yes. Would I be willing to bet on them to win Worlds? I honestly would, and we'll get to that later on. And it depends on what the line is, but I would love to take that kind of bet. I just don't think that no book in their right mind would give the accurate kinds of odds that would make me bet. And then Danny and Vulcan against FBI and Huhi. This is another spot where I think Vulcan is just better than Huhi, and I think that Danny is just better than FBI. I know FBI, we've seen some good performances from him in the LCS. I would argue that the best Danny performances that we've seen, even though they're not as consistent as FBI has been, Danny's peak in the LCS, I think, has looked better than FBI's peak. But I'm not trying to take anything away from FBI. I just need to make the argument that Danny is as good as FBI. And I think that most people who have watched League of Legends, specifically the LCS, would agree that Danny is a higher variant AD carry, has like more playmaking upside. That Tristana performance, I mean, I'll never be able to get that out of my head. So that's kind of where I see Evil Geniuses against 100 Thieves. So now that we're going to move into the LEC next, but I don't want everybody who thinks that Team Liquid is better than Evil Geniuses or 100 Thieves is better than Evil Geniuses feels like the rest of this video is going to be a waste. If you think that TL or 100 Thieves is better than Evil Geniuses, then the rest of it will be relevant. Just substitute Team Liquid or 100 Thieves for Evil Geniuses. I don't see it that way. And the matchups aren't really going to line up the same because the strengths of EG are different than the strengths of Team Liquid or 100 Thieves. But we're going to go through that now. So let's start in the LEC. And this is basically me asking how good could they do? That sounds really strange. In the LEC. So let me get... I already did the best in the West, so I'll just do the best in the West again. Make my own template. No. Whoops, my account. Whoops. Sorry about that. Best in the West. So this is my best in the West. And again, you can do this just by comparing all these different teams. I don't need to go over Team Liquid or 100 Thieves again, but we can start with G2. So let's talk about G2 against Evil Geniuses. So G2, we have Broken Blade against Impact. I think that Broken Blade is a good player. If you want to play... Actually, yeah, if you want to play the whole... So we're right here. Broken Blade, Yonkos, Caps, Flocked, Targamas. If you want to say, like, oh, well, Impact is... Broken Blade is good enough to beat Impact, I think that's true. I think that Broken Blade has a good enough champion pool that he can force stress in the draft onto Evil Geniuses, which will make it potentially more difficult for Evil Geniuses to win the series. But I think that Impact is good enough to also neutralize that or play carry matchups against Broken Blade. Jankos against Inspired. I think Inspired's a better player. Everybody who has seen Inspired perform over the past few years has seen Inspired consistently out-jungle Jankos. Not always, but consistently. Over 50% of the time, I would say. And I think most people would prefer to have Inspired over Jankos in their team. Then we have Caps against Jojo Pyun. Caps is a great player. I can't put Jojo Pyun into the Caps level yet, but I hope that he can reach that kind of height. The other question would be, does Jojo Pyun need to be as good as Caps in order for Evil Geniuses to have a chance to win Worlds? I would say the answer is no. I would say no. Because the talent differences in the other spots would allow Jojo Pyun to not be the primary carry within their team. Then we have Flocket and Targamas. I think that Danny and Vulcan are clearly better than Flocket and Targamas right now, just from individual talent. It's possible that as time goes on, we have a much higher opinion of Flocket and Targamas, but I don't have that opinion of them now. That's not it. Okay, next up, Mad Lions. So I'm a pretty big Mad Lions hater in general, but again, let's just go through it. Armut against Impact. Impact has won a world championship, and he can play all of these matchups both sides. I think that a good proxy for Impact in LEC would be somebody like Otoamne. So if it helps you visualize things, just think to yourself like, if Impact is as good, if not better, than Otoamne, then that's what the matchup should look like. And we've seen that matchup before. Otoamne has beaten Armut, and vice versa. El Yoya against Inspired. I think Inspired's the better player, and that's probably the biggest difference of opinion that I have with a lot of people. There are probably a lot of LEC fans and Mad Lions fans who think that El Yoya is better than Inspired. I have no reason to agree with you on that. Rogue was a very strong regular season team. They didn't always perform great in the playoffs, and I think that's part of the reason why Inspired left. Inspired was frustrated with the team and how they approach the game, and hopefully Inspired has a much larger voice within Evil Geniuses, and that will contribute to them playing the style that allows Inspired to win the game for his teammates, which is it needs to be more like the LNG style that like Tarzan plays, where it might be a little bit lower kills, lower variance, but you're going to win more consistently. And you can play to your advantages more easily. Then we have Jojo Pyun against Reeker. I don't see any reason to think that Jojo Pyun can't be Reeker's level. And then we have Unforgiven and Kaiser. Clearly, Danny and Vulcan are as good, if not better, than Unforgiven and Kaiser. I would say that they're better. So I think that Evil Geniuses has an advantage top lane in experience. At worst, you have to agree to that argument, I think. Inspired against Oyoya, I prefer Inspired. Jojo Pyun to Reeker, you can just say that's a wash. And then Unforgiven and Kaiser versus Danny and Vulcan, I'd take Danny and Vulcan every day of the week. Next up, we have Fanatic. So, this one people will probably disagree with me on. I think that Impact is better than Wonder still. I think that Impact has been better throughout his career and will continue to be better than Wonder. I'm interested to hear if anybody thinks that's not true. Then Razork against Inspired. Inspired's clearly better than Razork. Humanoid against Jojo Pyun. And this is probably another spot where I just have a huge difference of opinion with everyone else. I think that Humanoid is a one-trick pony, almost exclusively good at TF, is super overrated. I really genuinely think he's probably the most overrated player in the LEC right now. And I think that Jojo Pyun, going into a matchup against Humanoid, it wouldn't be like, oh, either I'm going to play TF or you're going to play TF. I think that Jojo Pyun would be able to play against the TF and just dominate. I think that all you have to do is outscale, and if Evil Geniuses is playing against Fnatic where they have the ability to outscale, I would like that matchup for Evil Geniuses. And then the bot lane Upset and Hillsong against Danny and Vulcan. This is the spot where you'd probably have the best argument against Danny and Vulcan, but I think that Vulcan is most likely a better player than Hillsong and will be remembered as a better player than Hillsong over the length of their careers, which isn't taking anything away from Hillsong. We're talking about a couple of the best supports in their region ever. So that's like you're splitting hairs at that point. And then Upset against Danny. I think that Danny is a more high variance player, is a better playmaker than Upset. I think that Upset will lose the game for his team less often than Danny will, but I think that Danny's upside, which you will need to beat the best teams in the world, I think that Danny has a higher ceiling than Upset does. And again, you might be somebody who prefers consistency. I prefer upside. That's just how I am. Let's go to Vitality. This is a tough one. Vitality is a tough one because I love Vitality. I love a lot of these players. Impact against Alfari. I think that you can just give it to Alfari, and I'm fine with that. I think that the one trap card is that Alfari might feel like required to play carry champions, allowing Impact to take the passive portion of that matchup and then go even, and then it's like on Vitality to force the game, to force action in the game to create an advantage. Otherwise, Impact's champion is going to outscale. I think that's very possible in this matchup, and we've seen that before in matchups between Evil Geniuses and Team Liquid when Alfari was on Team Liquid, but also between Alfari teams like Origin against other teams, like when they would play against a team like Rogue, for example. Self-made against Inspired. I like it. I like Self-made a lot. I'm probably higher on Self-made than most people. But I think Inspired is better than Self-made, which I don't think anybody's going to fight me on that. So I'm just going to move past it. Perks against Jojo Pyun. I think that Perks is one of the best players of all time, from the West. Same as Caps. Definitely, both of them are definitely better than Humanoid. Humanoid will never be on their level. And I'm saying that like a length of career, not length of career, the quality of career. I know that some people think that Humanoid's better than Perks right now. And we haven't seen the best of Perks, and I still think that Perks is better. I would still prefer to have Perks. Like, people forget how good Perks was at Worlds. He was a true difference maker at points. And then we have Karzi and Labrov against Danny and Vulcan. I'll take Danny and Vulcan over Karzi and Labrov right now. I think that Danny's a better player than Karzi, and I think that Vulcan is clearly a better player than Labrov. But I think that Karzi and Labrov are a good enough bot lane to be on a LEC contender and to make some noise at Worlds, but they're not going to be the reason that Vitality wins Worlds if they do, which would be really cool. I'd be really excited for that possibility. No, you have a pink water bottle. I got this today at lunch. This is not a staple water bottle for me, but it does keep water very cold. And then the last team, we're going to go Inspired against his old team, Rogue. So Odoamne against Impact. I think that you can call that a wash. I would probably prefer Impact in a Worlds format. Malrong against Inspired. I think that you can say... I know that some people will want to say that Malrong is better than Inspired already. I think that Inspired is probably better in the same way that Canyon is better than Malrong. And I'm not saying that Inspired is as good as Canyon, but their playstyle, from what I've seen, is slightly different to Malrong. Malrong is more likely... I mean, I guess it depends on your coaches as well. Like, I don't... If you gave Malrong the option to play whatever he wants, maybe he doesn't play Jarvan as much as he has played Jarvan so far. And they both play Diana. They both have, like, the ability to carry. I think that they're both very good players. I'm fine saying that one's even. At worst, it's even. Larson against Jojo Pyun. Again, I think that Larson's champion pool has real limitations the same way that Humanoid does, but I think that Larson overall is a better player than Humanoid. Jojo Pyun, so far what we've seen is that he's a flexible player, can play a lot of different stuff. That makes me feel like he's closer to the Caps and Perk style, where they can play anything. They can play any mid lane champion. Because there's like a mechanical barrier to some of the champions that Perks and Caps can pull out, and I would assume Jojo Pyun can pull out. Jojo Pyun wants to be North American Chovy. That's you kind of have to play everything in order to do that. Notice how he didn't say I want to be North American Humanoid. And then we have Comp and Trimby against Danny and Vulcan. I'm not going to argue with you about that. It's obvious that Danny and Vulcan are better than them. So you have Impact's probably better than Odoamne. Inspired and Malrong, you can just make it even. If you want to give it to Malrong, then whatever, but I just don't see that as being reality right now based on what we've seen. And then Jojo Pyun and Larson, you probably want to give Larson a slight edge in the same way that you want to give Upset a slight edge over Danny, but I'm not going to. And then Comp and Trimby, I think that the bot lane for EG is much better, which, like, theoretically, if these two teams played against each other, Malrong and Larson against Inspired and Jojo Pyun, I would see that kind of matchup being very low kill, low variance, kind of play a slower game, play around Dragon, play around a Rift Herald trade. Like one team is going to take Rift Herald and go top lane, the other one's going to just go bot lane and try to take the entire tower without Rift Herald, hopefully get a Dragon around the same period, and then just keep trading objectives until you get to a large team fight. And in that large team fight setting, I would prefer to have Danny and Vulcan over Comp and Trimby. Obviously, the draft needs to go a specific way for that to play out, but that's what I would think is going to be a bulk of the matches between those two teams. Let's go to the LCK. So, in the LCK, I would love to see Evil Geniuses play in the LCK. Obviously, there's no easy way to make that happen. Outside of buying a North Korean team and buying all the players from Evil Geniuses. But let's start with DRX, because I like DRX a lot. So Impact against Kingen, I would prefer Impact, I think. Piosik against Inspired. I like Piosik a lot. I think that most people would probably put them similar. Zika against Jojo Pyun. I like Zika better, and I think that Zika is probably going to be better long term. Deft and Barrel against Danny and Vulcan. I would prefer to have Danny and Vulcan, I think. Deft is like an all-time player. Like, he's obviously one of the best AD carries of all time. But I think that the way that teams with Deft generally draft would give the advantage over to a team like Evil Geniuses with Danny and Vulcan. I feel like Evil Geniuses would be allowed to play the aggressive side of matchups in bot lane, which is the easier way to play League of Legends. But I know that's probably a hot take. Against KT Rolster, who has had some good performances. Rascal against Impact. Again, I think most people are just going to be fine with Impact going even against most of these guys. Cuz against Inspired, I'll take Inspired. Arya against Jojo Pyun. I like Arya a decent amount. I could see that one being even, if not Arya favored. Aiming and Life against Danny and Vulcan. Again, this is where your talent evaluation has to put Danny around their level. Aiming is very good. Aiming is a very good AD carry. I think that I would probably prefer to have Aiming on my team. But I would rather have Vulcan than Life. Next up, Nongshim. So Nongshim is another good team. Kana against Impact. I would rather have Kana for sure. Kana is probably the best top laner in the world. Dread against Inspired. Some people like Dread a lot. I think that I'd rather have Inspired, or at least that the difference isn't big enough where Inspired's going to be dominated by Dread. BDD against Jojo Pyun. You have to go BDD. BDD is a very good player. Ghost and Effort. Ghost has played really well recently. I think that Danny is good enough to beat Ghost and Effort, and I think a big reason is because Danny is more likely to play the hard carry side of things. Ghost is more likely to play the utility side of things. I think that alone would carve out some percentage points for Evil Geniuses. If Ghost continues to play Aphelios, Jinx, and these hard carry champions, that would change things. I could see my opinion on that matter changing over time. But if Evil Geniuses plays against Nongshim in the World Championship, Nongshim would most likely be the favorite. And I would prefer to be on the Evil Geniuses side for the upset. T1. So obviously T1, Damwon, and Genji, these are very tough matchups for Evil Geniuses. But we'll start with Damwon because they're the third one on the list. So Birdall against Impact. This is a spot where I think the high variance of Birdall is something that I'm going to want to bet into for a long time because I like that upside. I like that style. Impact would have the easier side of that matchup in the sense that he isn't expected to win the lane hard. All he has to do is CS and not feed. And then his champion is going to be a good tank in the late game, whereas Birdall's potential Fiora or Camille is going to have to be more of a playmaker in those late game scenarios. And we've seen Birdall do well, and we've also seen Birdall make some big mistakes. Canyon against Inspired, you have to give it to Canyon. That's going to put a lot of stress onto Inspired. Showmaker against Jojo Pyun, you have to give it to Showmaker, obviously. Diakdom and Kellen against Danny and Vulcan. And again, this is a spot where I think I genuinely believe that Danny can go toe-to-toe with this type of bot lane. Diakdom is a very good late game hard carry style AD carry, which is going to make the game very difficult for Evil Geniuses, because in order to beat Dom1 Gaming, you're going to need to go even in a losing matchup top lane, probably, or at least pressure-wise, a losing matchup. Canyon and Showmaker, you'd have to either beat Canyon and Showmaker, which is unlikely, or you'd have to deal with their pressure long enough to get into a team fight where you're probably down a couple thousand gold and like flip a Baron or something. It's going to be very tough to do that. And then against Danny and Vulcan, against Diakdom and Kellen, that's probably going to be a scaling. It's going to be probably a scaling battle, and I don't know. It's that one's a tough one. You probably have to give that one to Dom1. Not gonna lie, but it depends on the money. It depends on the money line that the book would offer. I'd be somewhat interested at Evil Geniuses if they're a huge underdog, and I'd probably bet on them to win a game or two. But I really don't see Evil Geniuses being able to beat a team like Dom1 unless we see Jojo Pyun have elite upside, which I think right now is within his range of outcomes. Genji against Evil Geniuses is a very similar spot, except I think that Doran is more likely to go even in lane against Impact, like a lower variance top laner than Birdall. Peanut against Inspired. I think that Inspired is a similar type of player to Peanut, and I think that their matchup against one another would be very feast or famine for both sides, where I could see Peanut dominating one of their games, and then I could see Inspired coming back and dominating a game as well. Chovy against Jojo Pyun. The fact that Jojo Pyun wants to beat Chovy, I think that Chovy's probably better than Jojo Pyun. And then Ruler and Lehens against Danny and Vulcan. That's another one. That one's even more so than Diakdom and Kellen. You have to give it to Ruler and Lehens. Their team is built around Ruler. He is a great AD carry. He is one of the best AD carries of all time. And he knows exactly how to play his role. So I think it'll be a very tough matchup for Evil Geniuses in there. And then T1 against Evil Geniuses. Zeus against Impact. I think that we've already kind of seen that Zeus is more likely to play a lower variant style top lane, which would give Impact some opportunities to play the carry side of things, but it would also allow him to go even in lane. Owner against Inspired. I think that Owner has looked pretty good so far. I think that we've seen better performances from Inspired, but I think that they're both very high skill cap junglers. I know that most people would probably want to give the advantage to, I would assume, Owner, right? Just because he's a Korean pro. That's a big question mark for me. Faker against Jojo Pyun, you have to go Faker. And then Gumayusi and Keria against Danny and Vulcan. And again, Gumayusi has a great following. People think the world of him, and they think that he's going to be one of the best AD carries in the world. If he's not already one of the best AD carries in the world, he's a little bit flashier than somebody like Ruler or Viper. And then we have Keria, who I think is probably the best support in the world. So that's definitely T1 favorite as well. I don't know where the playmaking would come from in EG, and it would depend on really good drafts as well, where like stylistically just some matchup they get against T1 allows them to get early game advantages, because T1 is a type of team that's willing to like hemorrhage blood lead, or to give up large gold leads to just stick in the game and then try to coin flip a dragon team fight. So yeah, I do think that if Evil Geniuses were in the LCK, I do think they could be a top 4, top 5 team. At least be competitive. I think that they're definitely better than Kwangdong. I think they're better than Fredit. I think they're better than Hanwha Life. I think they're better than Live Sandbox. And again, I'd love to see that kind of happen, but it's not going to happen. China. I mean, Evil Geniuses in China would be really cool too. It'd be a bloodbath. Like, I think if you put Evil Geniuses into LPL, that would allow people to have the highest opinion possible of Evil Geniuses, because their playstyle is so like explosive, and the lower echelon teams in the LPL are more likely to have these like huge death performances. I did open the wrong one. So let's start with I mean, I think that obviously there are good chances that teams like V5, JDG, FPX could beat them. It's I don't know how far down I want to go. I think I just want to start with BLG. And that's not me assuming that they would beat FPX, JDG, V5, and everything. It's just we can't do every single team, right? I just can't do that. So BLG. So Breathe against Impact. I think that Breathe is the better player. Wei against Inspired. I think Inspired's better. Fofo against Jojo Pyun. Fofo has shown more on stage and has been an okay professional. He's overrated though. So that what happens there is like my opinion of Jojo Pyun is probably more in line with market, and then my opinion of Fofo is lower. So that gap between the two players is going to be much smaller for me compared to other people betting on this or playing DraftKings for this. And then we have Doggo and Crisp against Danny and Vulcan. And again, that's a spot where it's going to be more difficult for Danny and Vulcan to like win that lane hard enough because they're both going to be playing hard scaling champions most likely. And if they're not, if Doggo is the one playing the hard carry and Danny is the one playing like 4 laning phase, then you could see Evil Geniuses kind of getting an advantage there. But that's in like the best case scenario. So that's that'd be a tough matchup, obviously. If they played heads up, you know that BLG is going to be the favorite. So I would have the opportunity to bet on Evil Geniuses as an underdog. So I guess that's kind of the breaking point where all of these just become matchup dependent. I expect Evil Geniuses to be the underdog, but there are numbers where I would bet Evil Geniuses against all of these teams. Suning. So we have Weibo. So the Shy against Impact. I think that the Shy is going to be remembered as at his peak a better player than Impact, but Impact's playstyle is less volatile. Probably better for like a best of, or maybe not better for a best of 5, because the Shy, if he gets the right matchup in a couple of those games, he could just win the entire thing. SFM against Inspired, I prefer Inspired, but they're both very good. Angel against Jojo Pyun, I think that we have to just, if Evil Geniuses makes it to World, everybody's going to have the opinion that Jojo Pyun can compete with Angel. And then Huanfeng and Sword Art against Danny and Vulcan. And again, this is a spot where we have to hope that Danny and Vulcan are able to create good matchups against scaling 80 carries. I think that it would be easier for me to convince myself Evil Geniuses would beat Weibo Gaming than it would be for BLG. And that's because like I think that Weibo is just a more volatile team than BLG is. RNG. Bin against Impact, I would rather have been. Wei against Inspired, I'd probably rather have Inspired, but they're pretty similar. I think that Inspired's in this talent range for a lot of the LPL junglers. And we've seen Shadow play pretty well in the LPL. Even though his team isn't winning, I think that he shows that it's possible for LEC level players to compete in the LPL. At least the elite LEC players. Xiaohu against Jojo Pyun. Xiaohu's better. You got to put him in the upper echelon. Gala and Ming against Danny and Vulcan. Again, I have a lower opinion of Gala than most people. This is the kind of matchup that I'd love to see because I'm going to get value for my money in a spot against RNG, in my opinion. Top Esports. Top Esports hasn't looked that good so far. I'm not like completely abandoning them. Zoom, Xiaopeng, Knight, Jackie Love, Shuo. I think that Impact and Zoom probably just go even because Zoom generally won't draft around the team. The team generally won't draft around Zoom. Tian against Xiaopeng. No, Xiaopeng against Inspired. I'd rather have Inspired, I think. But again, similar talent levels until proven otherwise. Knight against Jojo Pyun. I'd rather have Knight. Jackie Love and Zhuo against Danny and Vulcan. I'd probably rather have Danny and Vulcan. Jackie Love has been very questionable for the last year or so. But again, that's a hot take. I know. Most people would say Jackie Love's better, but again, that's why I would want the Top Esports Evil Geniuses matchup, because even though I know Evil Geniuses would be the underdog, I'd want to bet on them. LNG. This is probably the toughest matchup. Let's do EDG first, because I think that LNG is better than EDG. So Impact against Flandre, I think that's probably even. Flandre could probably carry harder than Impact can, though. Jai Jai against Inspired. I prefer Inspired, I think. But again, Jai Jai is definitionally a world championship caliber jungler. He's not the reason why his team won, but he was able to be carried hard enough by Viper and Scout. And I'm not trying to discredit what Jai Jai did in the finals. It's just like the team wasn't built around him. Then Scout against Jojo Pyun, you have to go Scout. Viper Mako, you have to go Viper Mako because Viper is one of the best AD carries of all time. And then just move on to LNG. Ale against Impact. You probably have to go Ale. Tarzan against Inspired, you have to go Tarzan. Duanbi against Jojo Pyun, you have to go Duanbi. Light and Lumao against Danny and Vulcan. Lumao's looked pretty bad. If Vulcan spoke Chinese, I'm sure that he'd be better than Lumao. And then Light against Danny. I'm not sure about that one. I think that there's chances that Danny can beat him. I know that there's chances Danny could beat him. So then, but this is another one where the top half of the map is going to be so difficult to manage for Evil Geniuses that they have very slim chances of beating a team like LNG. So that's basically all I have for you today. I think that Evil Geniuses could definitely win the LEC. I think that they would be competitive in the mid-range for the LCK, and I think that they'd be competitive in the mid-range as well for the LPL. But we don't need them to do that to get to Worlds. We just need them to get to Worlds, and then you have some of these matchups. Maybe they can, make some noise in the knockout stage. That'd be cool. But that's all I have for you today. I wanted to make this video because I really do believe in Evil Geniuses, and I think that this kind of thought exercise allows you to see how even though, we just take it for granted that certain teams are better than other teams, you have to go through this kind of exercise to see exactly how you think the teams match up with one another and what kind of play style they could potentially adopt to win as an underdog. So that's all I've got for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Like, comment, subscribe, join Patreon, join Discord. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.